Welcome to our sponsored programs Budgeting Basics. These videos are designed to help you understand the budgeting process and enable you to create a draft budget for your sponsored project. Today we're looking at what you need to do if you want to budget for hiring someone new on your grant. By new, we mean hiring someone who is not a current JMU employee. In our last video, we talked about personnel costs for existing JMU employees. In this video, we're also not talking about hiring students. That will be covered in a future video. What we're talking about here is a situation where you'll need a project coordinator or a dedicated administrative assistant or something like that. If the project is funded, you'll be running a search to fill the position. How do you go about budgeting for that in your grant? These videos don't replace working with grant specialists. Our grant specialists here in OSP are experts in the nuances of uniform guidance and know details beyond what we will get into here. They also read through the rules for your specific program to make sure to catch any unique rules that apply. Your assigned grant specialist will work with you individually to construct a budget that meets your needs and complies with all the sponsor and JMU rules and regulations. This is especially important for this topic, where this video will be good for giving you the basics on hiring a new employee, but your grant specialist will probably need to adjust your numbers slightly in the final budget. One of the first things you'll need to do if you're hiring a new employee is figure out appropriate pay for the position. We strongly recommend working with human resources to avoid problems later. The first step is to come up with a draft position description which describes the work that the employee will be doing. For many grants, this will be part of the proposal package anyway, especially if you are hiring a full-time employee. Next, you can share this position description with your unit's HR consultant. If you don't know who this is, you can find it on JMU's HR website using the HR contact search. Then you can work with your unit's consultant to determine a reasonable pay range. This process may take a few weeks, so we recommend sharing a draft position description with them early. It's useful to know that if you are planning on hiring a full-time worker, you'll generally be looking to come up with an annual salary. On the other hand, for a part-time worker, you'll generally be looking to come up with an hourly wage. Once you know the appropriate page, then we can proceed with putting it into your budget. It's important to realize that if your project is funded, you're going to charge your actual costs to the grant. It's a problem if there's not enough money in your budget to cover your actual costs. And therefore, throughout this video, we will recommend using the maximum pay value in the budget to make sure that there's sufficient funds to cover your actual costs, whatever they end up being. So now let's pull up our budget template. So now let's see where we can find the templates on OSP's website. This is our website. In this bar at the left, you'll see Budget Development. If you click here, you can see that the first option is Overview, Templates, and Resources. This brings you to this page, where scrolling down, you can see our templates. There's an NSF-specific budget template, as well as an SF424 budget template, and an R&R budget template. For the rest of this video, we're going to use this generic budget template so that it's as broad as possible. Let's start with the case where our new employee is a full-time employee. Typically, a new employee wouldn't be PI or co-PI, so let's put them later down in the personnel section. We'll put them as TBD and then describe their role in the project, for example, coordinator. In this column, under base salary, you put the maximum salary that you got from your discussion with HR. For this video, we'll take an example of $45,000. Then the next column, percentage of FTE or full-time equivalent, is 1 if you are hiring one person for the full year. If you're hiring 2 people, you might put 2 in here. If you are hiring someone for part of a year consistently throughout the grant, you might put 0.5 or something else in here. Your grant specialist would be happy to work this out with you. Then in year 1, you can put this equal to the salary, and if you want, times the full-time equivalent. So for example, 45,000 here. As before, the columns on match, in-kind, and cash will be discussed in a later video. So then the next question is, what do we do for later years? If you're working with one of our other budget templates, the values in these later years might have already been updated. Here in our generic one, they do not, because some sponsors allow for a cost of living increase projected and others do not. So if, for example, your sponsor does not allow for a cost of living increase, your year 2 might just be equal to your year 1 cost, and then year 3 equal to year 2, and so on for the projected length of the sponsored program. On the other hand, when a sponsor allows us to account for projected cost of living increases, we prefer to do that. Here in sponsored programs, our preference is to use a 3% projected increase per year. The way you can take that into account is for year 2, saying it equal to 1.03, that 3 is for the 3% cost of living increase, times our year 1 value. Then in year 3, we would set that equal to 1.03 times our year 2 value, and so on for the length of the sponsored program. This is assuming you are planning on hiring the person for the full year. On the other hand, if you're only planning on hiring them for part of the year, there are a few options for what you can do. You could first of all change this full-time equivalent to be, say, 0.5, which changes in year 1. Note that even though this says 1, we have 0.5, and so you may need to adjust the number of decimal places that are shown in order to see your change. However, the value here in year 1 did automatically update. The other thing that we could use is calendar months, which we talked about in our previous video on existing JMU employees. So if you want to use calendar months, you would take that base salary, you would still do it times the full-time equivalent, and then you would divide by 12 times your number of calendar months. This can be useful if, for example, you are only using calendar months for the first year, and then in the second year they're going to be continuing on full-time, in which case you might want to do the base salary times the fact that you have 1 employee, and then if you wanted to include a cost of living projected increase, 1.03, for example. This can be a little bit complicated, and so I do want to emphasize that your grants specialist is here to work with you whatever situation you're going to find yourself in with hiring your new employee. But what if instead of a full-time employee, you're planning on hiring a part-time employee paid an hourly wage? Most of the time, such employees are students, but we will address student hiring in a different video as there are some additional specific roles. However, it turns out that these roles do not really impact the budget for hiring graduate students in the summer, so you can just rename that line if you want. In order to keep this as general as possible, I'm instead going to duplicate this line. So I'm going to insert a new line and then copy our graduate student line down there, and I'm just going to label this to be 6 other personnel. We're going to get to fringe benefits later in this video, but it's going to be easiest if we add an extra line down here as well and copy our graduate line down here. And note that this has automatically changed from the graduate label to the one that we've had above, namely 6 other personnel. You may need to adjust these columns if you have match, but since we're not covering cost sharing in this video, we're not going to deal with that right now. So going back up to this personnel cost section, first we put the maximum hourly rate from your discussions with HR under the rate column. Again, if your project is funded, you'll charge your actual cost to the grant, but we want to budget so that you'll have enough money even if you end up paying at the upper end of your range. So for example, we'll say that's $23 an hour. Next, in the next column, we put the number of hours that you expect this person to work in each year. So for example, let's say that you plan on having someone do 20 hours of work over 35 weeks in the year. Here we would put 20 times 35 with an equal sign in front to tell Excel that it is a calculation. So that's 700 hours of work within the year. And then finally, this last column accounts for the fact that you might be hiring multiple of these part-time workers. Let's say we're hiring 3 of them. So how do we actually put this in the budget? So if you're working with one of our other templates, it may calculate it automatically. In this generic template, it doesn't. But what we do is we start with an equal sign, and then we take our hourly rate times our number of hours, and then times our number of people. And that tells us the cost for the first year. For later years, we can again either set that equal to the first year if our sponsor doesn't allow a cost of living increase, or include a projected cost of living increase by multiplying by, say, 1.03 for a 3% cost of living increase. Now, there might be complicated situations where you expect to have only one employee in the first year and three in the second year, and so on. Your grants specialist can help you account for these unusual situations. We come to the most complicated piece, fringe benefits. For a part-time employee, this is simple. The only fringe benefit we need to include is JMU's share of FICA. FICA funds Social Security and Medicare and has two parts. One part employees fund out of their pay, and the other part is paid by employers. This latter part has to be included in your budget. JMU's share of FICA is 7.65%, and this is actually already included within our budget template. You can see that for our newly created other personnel category, we have the 7.65% FICA here, and that these columns have automatically been calculated. If you don't see this, you probably forgot to add this row when you added the row above up here. And also, if you've renamed your graduate personnel, then you should see the change here in this row. However, for our full-time employee, JMU will be obligated to provide them not just with their FICA, their Social Security, and Medicare, but also with benefits such as health insurance, retirement, etc. And so we will need to budget for your sponsored program to be able to pay these costs. Please remember, as explained above, it's better to budget at the upper end, as is your actual costs that will be charged to a grant, than to budget too low and then be unable to hire your employee as you won't be able to meet their costs. Here I'm going to show you a way to get pretty reliable numbers to start your budget. Your grant specialist may fine-tune these numbers a bit when they work through your budget with you. We get most of this information from JMU's Office of Budget Management. On their homepage, under Quick Links, you'll find the benefit rates for salaried positions. There is a second version of this page with the same information that you might find from different sources. The only major difference between these pages is that here, VRS refers to a retirement plan for people who were hired at JMU earlier, and the hybrid plan on this page is labeled as VRS over on this page. Otherwise, all of the percentages should agree between the two pages, and it doesn't matter which ones you use. Note that this video currently uses percentages for fiscal year 2026. If you are watching this video at a later time, please use updated numbers for the fiscal year you are working on. These are the benefits from those websites for full-time employees for fiscal year 2026. If you're watching this video at some other time, the values may be different. Please always use the most up-to-date numbers. We'll start with the fringe benefits that always need to be included for all employees. I've bolded these ones and put them in blue. These include the FICA contribution, which is called Social Security here. Note that some of these are percentages, but at least one is a dollar amount. We'll talk about how to handle that later. Looking at the ones that I've labeled in blue, these add up to 10.45% of the salary plus $480 currently. Next, let's talk about retirement. If you are budgeting to hire someone eligible to select the Valors Plan, Virginia Law Officers Retirement Systems, so generally a police officer, also include the retirements I've bolded and put in red here. If you're hiring someone who will be classified staff, then instead use the VRS hybrid number, which I've highlighted in red and bolded. If you are hiring faculty, whether A&P or instructional faculty, they will have the choice of the VRS plan or the optional retirement plan, whose costs are down here in this line. You cannot choose this for them. Therefore, I recommend budgeting with VRS, which is the more expensive option, to make sure that you have sufficient funding budgeting. So unless you are hiring a police officer, in which case you use the two Valors numbers, I would recommend budgeting with the VRS or hybrid number, bringing your total to 25.47% of the salary plus $480. The last thing we need to include is health insurance. This is the only case in which we don't use the values from the Office of budget management. This is because the value they have is for one employee with no spouse or dependents on their insurance. However, when you are hiring someone new, you do not know whether they will have a spouse or dependents on their insurance, and it is illegal to ask during the hiring process. JMU does pay more towards an employee's health insurance if they have a spouse and or dependents on the plan, and so therefore we use a higher number that incorporates this possibility. I'll talk about how we calculate that now. This value, you can use the HR benefits calculator. It helps to know that health insurance cost is a flat amount that doesn't vary by employee type, contract length, or even total salary. So for this example, I'm going to consider a classified employee with a 12-month contract that makes $45,000 as per our earlier example. The important thing to make sure is to change this entry from employee to employee plus 2 or more. And then we'll select one of the available health plans. The remaining pieces of information really don't impact things much, so you can select whatever you want. Then we hit calculate. The percentages of totals here are going to be very different from what we found on our earlier page, because this is the percentage of total compensation, whereas earlier the percentages on the Office of Management budget page was as percentage of your salary. However, hopefully the rest of these numbers, Social Security combined with Medicare, and the life insurance matches what you have put in your budget, at least closely. The number that we want to pay attention to here is the health insurance number. As you can see, for the plan I've selected, this is $26,148. You might want to go through and compare the different plans instead of COVA Care, COVA Health Aware, and see how that changes. This one's slightly more at $26,580, which right now that one is the highest. So this is the value I would use in our estimate. I will give you a heads up that our grants specialists use a slightly different bit of information, and so the grants specialists will probably adjust this number slightly when they finalize your budget, but it shouldn't change too much from what this calculator gives you. And so this is a great way to get an estimate on your budget and get a draft of it in place. So now let's put everything together to calculate a fringe benefit rate. I'm going to assume that we're using VRS for our retirement, so using fiscal year 26 numbers, we have 25.47% of the salary plus $480 plus $26,580. There's 2 steps in figuring out the fringe benefit rate: figuring out the total dollar cost of all of the benefits together, and then figuring out what percentage of the salary this is. I'll go through an example of how to do this using Excel, but you can also use a calculator if you would prefer. First, let's put in our salary. We will keep working with our $45,000 salary example. Next, let's do the easy case. All of the benefits that are a flat amount. So right now, in January of 2026, this is $480 plus $26,580. Finally, we do the benefits that are a percentage of the salary. We found that these were 25.47%, so this is equal to 0.2547 times our salary that we entered above. These 2 numbers together tell us the total dollar cost of all of the fringe benefits that JMU provides in addition to the salary. And so we're going to take these 2 numbers and add them together. Next, we want to figure out what percentage of the person's salary this is. And so we are going to take the total dollar cost of the fringe benefits and divide that by the total salary and multiply that times 100. So we can see that in this example, the fringe benefits that JMU provides to this employee would be 85.6% of their salary. And that then is the benefits rate that we are now going to use back in our budget template. Okay, this last piece is much simpler. Now that we know that our full benefits rate, sometimes called our full fringe rate, we just need to go back and put that into our budget. So we go to our coordinator And the budget template just has FICA in there because it doesn't know that this is a new employee for which we would need to cover the entire benefits package. So in place of this 7.65%, we're going to put our benefits or fringe rate of 85.6%. And then we're going to change this label from FICA to full or full fringe just to keep track of where that number came from. Now, as soon as I change the number here, the numbers over here automatically update, and so does our total. And so now we've included both the salary cost, the personnel cost, as well as the fringe cost for a new hire, whether that's full-time or part-time. As I said, this doesn't include student hires, which we'll talk about in our next video. Now, if this seems a bit overwhelming, that's perfectly okay. Your grants specialist is here to help. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. You can email your grants specialist directly, or you can reach the office at grants@jmu.edu. I hope this video has helped you understand a little bit better the process of budgeting for a new employee on a sponsored program.